Hi everyone, it's Lisa from Valentines Soap. Welcome to my channel. Now today we're going to do a love soap. So what I've got here, first of all, is some love hearts that I've extruded using the Valentines Soap extruder discs, where it comes with two size hearts. We've got a larger size heart, if that will focus, and then a smaller size heart. And what I'm going to do is I want these hearts not as a long embed through my soap. I want them to be small embeds. So I'm just going to go through and chop these up. So this is a good way of actually getting embeds for sort of like put on the top of your soap. But I'm actually going to do a slab mould. So I want these embeds flat in my soap. So what I'm just going to do is just going to go through and cut these out. Now, a bit of advice about if you want to make smaller embeds from extruded soap. I extruded these hearts yesterday and I've just left them out overnight. And what will happen there is the soap dough itself will stay relatively soft, but it will harden up just enough so that when you cut it, it will keep hold of its shape. If you try and extrude and then cut it straight away or within an hour or so, it's quite likely that you will squash your shape. Now, even saying that, what I would advise doing as well is with your embed, when you're chopping it, is don't always have it pressing on the same point. I tend to just go through and rotate my embed round as well, so that I'm not always pushing down in the same way. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and slice these up. As you can see, I'd already made a start. This is a whole bunch of diddly widdly little hearts that I've already chopped up. And here's some of the other bigger ones that I've chopped up. And can you see that once I've chopped them, I do put them in a nice sealed container because I don't want them drying out anymore. I just want them to have got firm enough so that I can cut them without ruining the shape. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on doing this for these other sticks. I'm sure you don't need to watch it all. And then we'll come back and we'll look at what we're going to do with the soap. Okay, so I finished all my chopping up. So I've got a nice pot of larger hearts and a nice, I guess, half pot of the smaller hearts. So lots and lots and lots of hearts there. We must have several hundred there, I would have thought. Okay, so what are they for? Well, as I said, I'm going to do a love soap today. So I'm using my slab mould. And what I've done in my slab mould is I've made myself an impression mat. Can you see that sort of dimply surface on there? This impression mat, yes, I did make it myself, but you can buy impression mats really very easily from cake decorating shops or just on Amazon. One thing I would advise when you're buying an impression mat, it's quite likely that you're going to need to trim it to fit your mould. And that's just a case of measuring your mould very carefully and making sure that you trim your impression mat carefully. Now, what I would advise is think about how you trim it. So when I made my mould here, I made it larger than I needed it and then I trimmed it to fit my slab mould. Trim so that the centre of your impression mat is in the centre of your mould. What you don't want to do is say, for example, if your impression mat was, let's say it was 1 centimetre too long, don't just take 1 centimetre off the top, because what's likely to happen is most impression mats have a blank border around the edge. So you'll end up with sort of like some of your soaps with no pattern on at all, where you haven't centered the mat up. So look at your impression mat that you buy and carefully think about where is the best pattern that you want to get and make sure you trim carefully to fit that. Okay, so this is where my little soap hearts are coming in. Not really done impression mats in the past because it sits in that, that's a thing on the surface, and I'm not so keen on surfaces. But I watched a video, some of you might have seen it, I did a little collaboration with Tammy from Walnut Creek Bath Boutique and Shona from Nizumi Soaps a little while ago. And Shona did a lovely soap with an impression mat and I thought, Do you know what? That is lovely. And it really inspired me to do one. So I'm doing one. So this is where I've got my heart impression mat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this as a slab, and I'm going to do it 1 bar thick. So my hearts from my impression mat will just be on the surface. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer these bars, and then in between or in the layers, I'm then going to drop more little hearts. I know I'll probably regret this, the number of diddly hearts that I've got. So that as you use the soap, then every now and again, you'll get a little pattern of hearts popping up as you go through the soap. So the soap will actually change and reveal more hearts as you go through it. So that's the plan. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make up a tiny weeny amount of soap for our impression mat. Okay, so I've mixed up my tiny bit of soap. Now this is Red Riot from Micah Mama, and it's definitely more of a pink than a red. I've chosen it because I do want a pinkish red. It's the same colour as I've used for my embed, so can you see it's sort of like a darkish pink. Okay, so although it's called Red Riot, it's definitely not a red. So for our impression mat, we just really want to pour this onto our mat. You don't need very much at all, and then we just want to spread it around and fill in those shapes. So we want to make sure we fill them all in, but ideally you don't want to put too much soap in because you don't want to be trying to scrape it all out again endlessly. Now this is the first time I've used this impression mat, so I've just guessed on how much soap I would use, and I guessed at 100 grams of oil, which I think is overestimated, but we'll have a look in a minute. Okay, so I think I'm pretty well there in all my hearts, and I would say I probably used about half of that soap there. So about 50 grams of oil would have been plenty, and this slab mould here is sort of a 26 centimetre square. It's slightly longer than that one way, but it's about a 26 centimetre square slab mould. And obviously the amount that you're going to need will vary on how deep the design is on your impression mat. What you want to make sure with your impression mat is that you clean it off really well, because you want to see as much of the impression mat around the shape as possible, because you want the impression to really stand out. And if you leave the top dirty, as it were, with all the batter on it, then it's not going to make your design stand out. So it's well worth you spending a good bit of time very carefully going over and cleaning up that mat. Okay, so once you're happy that you've got it as cleaned as possible, excellent job if you're a faffer. You know, if you're one of those people that like spending ages on the tops of soaps twiddling around, this is one of those things you could spend ages going, oh, I'll scrape it, and I'll scrape it, and I'll scrape it. So what we now need to do is let that set up enough, because what we don't want to happen is when we pour the soap on top of it, we don't want it to shoot those hearts all out of the impressions. Okay, so I'm going to let that set up, and then we'll come back and start our first layer. I think my base is okay now to pour on top. I mean, it's definitely not completely solid, but I'm just hoping I'm not going to disrupt it. So I've just made up some pure white soap at this stage. So I've worked out how much soap I need for the thickness of my bars. I'm going to do 5 layers, so I've just divided it into 5. And the fragrance oil that I'm using today is white cashmere from Scent Perfect. And it's definitely just one of my favourites. It's just such a gorgeous smell. And I must admit, I was quite determined that I didn't want to use Loving Spell, because that just seemed too obvious. Okay, so let's get this poured on top. Okay, so it is quite fluid at the moment. It's definitely emulsified. It's not really at a trace, and that's because I want this to give me a nice flat layer. Okay, let's get that to flow into all the corners. Okay, so I'm just going to now leave that for that layer to set up. So I think I'm pretty nicely sort of set up here. So I'm going to start trying to get some of these hearts in. It's going to be a little fiddly job. Now I don't want to push them in too much. I don't want them showing through that top layer. I'm just going to gently drop them in. Okay, so the tweezers aren't working because of the shape of the heart. Every time you use the pressure on the tweezer, it sort of pops the heart out. So as much as I don't really like it, I am taking my glove off because this will just be a pain, and I'm not going to touch the soap, but I am just going to gently, just by hand, just drop these little hearts in. But I'm being very, very careful that I'm just not touching that soap. I'm not going for any specific design, I'm just sort of randomly dropping them in sort of little scatterings so that I think how they'll look pleasing when you come across them as you use the soap. I must admit that is a lot better by hand and just being super careful. It's not something I like to advise, but just sometimes, you know, let's face it, safety is very important, isn't it? But let's face it, sometimes as well, we're intelligent, we've got brains, we can make sure we just carefully do things and not touch the soap. Okay, so I think that will do. And what I've tried to do, I'm hoping that will work out, is that I've tried to keep the hearts sort of to where I think the middle of the bar, not necessarily the middle of the bars, but what I'm hoping is that when I cut the bars, ideally I'd like to not have the hearts cut through and protruding out the sides.
What's it like to be the one that he turns to when he's out of answers? What's it like to be the one that he comes to when he wants to dance? And I wonder what's that like? I have got him on my mind, but he doesn't know my name, and I'm running out of time. I wish you felt the same, and I'm acting stupid like every day. Don't know what to do or what I should say, 'cause I've got him on my mind, but he doesn't know my name.
Now I thought I'd show you what I'm doing whilst I prepare for my next layer, while the other layer is setting up. In my original plan, I was going to do a white, then a light pink, then a light grey, then a slightly darker grey, then a slightly darker grey / silver, let's say. So I've had to change that plan a little bit, and that's because I'm in the UK and I have to comply with our cosmetic regulations. So when I planned my soap out, I already have an assessment for this, which means I have to stick to the exact recipe that I've had assessed, including the micas and everything that go in. And in the UK, and I'm sure a lot of you know this already, we are not allowed to alter it by one tiny weeny little bit. So we can't put more of one mica in or less of another mica in. So why is that resulted in this weird situation here? I don't know what colour it's going to give me. I made these, didn't I? And I overestimated quite badly how many I'm going to use, but I can seal these up and I can use them in another project, so they're not wasted. But the problem is these did not go in my soap. Now, that has a couple of effects. It means the soap dough that I calculated in here as unfragranced soap, I've now got to, in my last layer, just adjust for the amount of soap that's not going into these soaps because of these embeds not in. But also as well, these embeds had Red Riot mica in them. So when I calculated what I could put in my soap, I deducted the mica that I'd used to make these to get to the mica that I would then had to put in my soap. So therefore, that's why I've now just gone backwards, weighed these, been able to calculate, because I know my exact recipe that I used to make these, calculate therefore the missing amount of Red Riot mica that's in my recipe, so has to go in. It's a palaver, and let's face it, does it really make a difference? Well, for our regulations, yes, we're not allowed to just put in a bit extra. So that's why I've got this slightly weird grey-red combo. I don't know what colour that's going to go. I've got a little bit of TD, so I'm just going to prepare that and then we'll pour that as our last layer. So we are set up now, and here's our unplanned colour, and actually I don't mind it at all. It is, on the camera it looks a bit of a funny brown colour, but it's just like a, I guess as you would expect, a silvery pink. So I'm all right with that. It did have quite a lot of the red in, because remember, as well as the embeds that I missed out, do you remember that very first layer where I used the soap for the impression mat? That had some of the mica in as well, so I've had to adjust for both of those things, just to make sure I stick exactly to my recipe. Because, of course, it could be horrendously dangerous if I had 0.02 gram of mica missing from my soap, couldn't it? But there we go, that's what we have to cope with. Right, let's get that evened out. And that's going to be it. I'm not doing anything to this surface, because remember, this is going to be the bottom of the soap, so I don't want any weird texture or put any embeds or anything. That just wants to be flat. And I must admit, I kind of like that colour. Okay, so here's our soap the next day, and as you can sort of see, the very gentle sort of, it's not really a gradient, is it? It's just layers on the side of it. So let's take this impression mat off. And one of the things that's quite nice, I think, with impression mats is when you do a slab soap, i.e. one that's just like 1 bar thick or whatever, so you're going to cut it horizontally, I always find there's not much excitement in cutting the soap because you already know what it's going to look like. So at least this, we need to reveal what we've got underneath. So let's gradually take off our impression mat. Look, and we've got all of our lovely little hearts underneath. Now you can see I've got a little join in my impression mat there, so that's why I had it in sort of 2 pieces and I had to join it together, but I've put that right in the middle of the soap, and that's going to be where I cut my soap. So I'm just going to run this through. Well, so, oh look, Can you see how I was trying to avoid those hearts so you couldn't see them? There's a one little sneaky peeper. Well, obviously push that one a bit too close to the edge. So far, on all the other cuts, we're doing okay. One little one, never mind. Okay, I won't cut them all on the video, but there we are. We can see we've got our nice little heart soaps. Most of them, I do seem to have managed to keep the hearts hidden. We know we had a few little peepers, didn't we? And I'll just finish these off. I'm going to plane around, not plane, I'm going to just bevel the edges of them. They don't need planing. I don't mind, remember that, let's call it the bonus colour that we had to put on the bottom. I don't mind that at all. I think it ties in with the rest of the soap quite nicely. This soap will be available in tomorrow's, if you're watching this as soon as it's been released, shop update. That's the 8th of January at 6 p.m. UK time, along with a selection of other new soaps, some that you'll have seen on YouTube and some that you won't. And remember, if you are a soap maker yourself, I've also got a huge range of tools to help you with your soap making, including lots of lovely new tools designed for Easter soaps and St. Patrick's Day. So why not pop over to the website and have a look. I hope you've enjoyed this video, folks, and that you like the soap. If you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, why don't you consider doing that so you can see what I'm making in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy soaping!